progressing through our Jewish journey through the Gospel of John. I want to remind you, if you have not picked up your patented refrigerator magnet with this word cloud, all the important words within the Gospel of John that we will be studying over the next year and change, those magnets are still on the table. If you're a first-time visitor, it will be in the bag that we give you as a gift and as a reminder. And for those of you who are regular attenders and already have your word cloud of John on your refrigerator, I hope that it hasn't become, at this point, invisible and part of the routine of what your kitchen looks like, but that you actually truly do look at it every now and then and say, oh, well, there's a word I hadn't seen before. And it's always very, very exciting, the thrill of discovery. Well, we want to look and see what we've done. Let's make sure that we are up to speed, up to date. And so previously, on a Jewish journey through the Gospel of John, and that brings us up to where we are. Let's bring those lights back on, please. Thank you. Wow, that's really bright. It's a very responsive team, but yes. But you know how some of us love the darkness instead of the light. Yeah, can we bring that light down just a little bit? It's popped back a little bit. This one, these two right here in front of me. These. Right here. Yes, okay, thank you. Good. Now I can see the screen in the back. All right. So to review, we saw the issue of purification come up. We saw an argument about John baptizing and Jesus' disciples baptizing more than John, and people were giving more allegiance, and the crowds were larger with Jesus than with John at this point. It had flipped. And so John responds, there are no small parts, only small actors. And he actually gives 4 pieces of interpretation to Yeshua's success, John's diminishment versus Yeshua's success. First is that John's success was from God. John played his role. It was of a supporting player, not the lead. He's the forerunner, but Jesus is the Messiah. John is the best man, but Jesus is the bridegroom. And finally, John posits that there is a divine trajectory to their ministry careers. John started well and is going to be finishing up rather quickly. He's about to be arrested, and he'll be executed shortly thereafter. And so there's a divine trajectory. John catapulted, but Jesus, remember, his trajectory comes down not from earth and up, but down from heaven, and his trajectory will return him to heaven. But there's a divine trajectory, and so that was his response. We saw that when it comes to Yeshua, when it comes to deciding for Jesus, when it comes to deciding pro or con, Jesus, Yeshua, it's a binary decision. There's either a yes or a no. There's either light or darkness. You either say yes or no, stay in the darkness or come into the light. There's no third way, there's no fourth way, there's only 2 ways. You're either a 1, Jesus is the 1, or you're a 0. Okay? It's a binary decision. And we saw finally that he who believes the Son has eternal life. The great promise that our faith has an ultimate purpose, and that is eternal life. But he who does not obey the Son will not see life, but the wrath of God abides on him. Again, binary choice. Jesus either the 1 or you a 0. Okay? You must choose. as the old knight said to Indiana Jones. But choose wisely. I suggest you choose for Yeshua. Now, when it comes to our story here, there's probably two really famous encounters that Jesus has that most people are familiar with in the Gospel of John. And one has to do with Nicodemus because of the John 3:16, that's where it comes from, the context. And I probably would posit that the second most popular, well-known story, encounter, is Jesus' encounter with the Samaritan woman. Well, as our text tells us, verse 4, he had to pass through Samaria. Now, let's explain Samaria just regarding geography here. This is Jerusalem right here. That's Jerusalem. And Samaria is this region right up here above Judea. This is Jerusalem. This region here is Judea. Directly above Judea is Samaria. Today we think of this as what's called the West Bank, or as Israel calls it, Judea and Samaria. And that makes sense, right? Above it is Galilee. So Jesus is going from Jerusalem to Galilee. His most direct route is to go through Samaria. Now, there are many who posit that Jewish people didn't regularly go through Samaritan territory, which is not always true. But let's just say that sometimes he could have gone, if he wanted to avoid the Samaritans, he could have crossed the Jordan River, gone into Perea, come up, crossed over at Scythopolis, Beth Sar, right here, and made his way up and avoided the Samaritan region whatsoever. But this is not what he did in this instance. He went the direct route from Jerusalem to Samaria, and he is headed right here for Sychar, which is a little village right outside of Shechem. He had to pass through Samaria, and so he came to a city of Samaria called Sychar. The Sychar today, we think, is a small little village which has a corruption of the name Sychar called Askar, right? To which I would then ask her what? Or if Jesus goes to Sychar, does that make him a prisoner of Ashur-ban? I don't know. But he has to pass through, and he came to the city of Samaria, called Sychar, near the parcel of ground that Jacob gave to his son Joseph. You'll remember this story. You won't. Of course you won't, which is why I'm going to read it for you. Jacob, first of all, buys the parcel of land that we're talking about. Jacob came safely to the city of Shechem. This is Nablus today. Neapolis, and Nablus is a corruption of the Greek Neapolis. Shechem is what we're talking about. In the land of Canaan, when he came from Paddan Aram and camped before the city, he bought the piece of land where he had pitched his tent from the hand of the sons of Hamor, Shechem's father, for 100 pieces of money. So the land was purchased, and then the land is going to be granted, bequeathed to his son Joseph on Jacob's deathbed. Then Israel, that is Jacob, said to Joseph, "Behold, I'm about to die, but God will be with you and bring you back to the land of your fathers. I give you one portion more than your brothers, which I took from the hand of the Amorite with my sword and my bow." So he's passing on to Joseph this particular parcel of land. So he came to the city of Samaria called Sychar, Askar today, near the parcel of ground that Jacob gave to his son Joseph, and Jacob's well was there. That's an awesome piece of detail, and the action is going to be around Jacob's well in this location. So Jesus, being wearied from his journey, was sitting thus by the well. It was about the 6th hour, which is 12 noon. So now, if you've been paying attention to the previous chapter, when did Nicodemus, the encounter with Nicodemus occurred at what time of the day? Night, right? And so you have a nighttime encounter, and it's followed now immediately by the next major encounter, and that is at noon. So darkness and light, night and day. And so we think about chapters 3 and 4, and we can say, night and day, you are the one. Only you need the moon, right? Night and day, contrast. Now this today is Shechem, and Sychar is over here, Aschar. You'll notice Mount Gerizim and Mount Eval here. Two major mountains that played a very important part in the story of Moses and the Israelites. Gerizim, Mount Eval, blessings and curses, you'll remember. And so this will orient you. I'm going to show you another couple of pictures so you can actually get oriented to the distances that we're talking about. Mount Gerizim, Mount Eval, the major city, Shechem, today Nablus. Jacob's Well is down here. You see there's a little bit of a red roof. That's the Orthodox Church right here. Sychar is here. This distance is just under a mile. This is just under a mile. I'm going to show you a couple more slides so you can get oriented. This is from the east. Now we'll see from the south. And in fact, we have Joseph's tomb comes into play here. And so again, Sychar to Jacob's Well. We're looking at a different direction now. Sychar to Jacob's Well, that's about a mile. This is Mount Eval. We're looking at Gerizim right here. And Old Shechem, the ruins of Shechem, are there. Again, another view. Jacob's Well, Joseph's tomb, Shechem. You can see how close everything is. This is the tell. Now this... one more view, okay? Because I'm thorough. I'm nothing if not thorough in orienting you to the geography. So again, so you get this location, because we're going to be camped in this location for 2 weeks. You might as well understand the relation of things to it. So Mount Eval, Mount Gerizim, this is where the Samaritans worship, by the way. This is their holy mountain. So Mount Gerizim, the shadow of, not only the shadow, the whole mountain, hill looms over Jacob's Well. Again, this is where she comes from. Sychar, this is about 1 mile. Joseph is buried right here on the way, almost, from Jacob's Well to Sychar. Clear? Good. If not, that's it. That's all the slides I'm going to show you on that one. Now, this is the city of Sychar about 140 years ago. What do you see? Do you see a lot of buildings? Do you see a lot of activity? Not much there, right? So this is only about 140 years ago. This is just before the turn of the previous century. We move on. There's another color picture of this. It's lovely. It's pastoral. There's a lot of open field. There's some old buildings. There's some terraced. And you see, of course, the mountain in the background. And this is Sychar today. This is the growth that has occurred in this congested area since the turn of the previous century. Make of that what you will regarding the residents who claim to have lived in that area for hundreds and hundreds of years. Well, anyway, that's not where I'm going today. Let's get to the text. Now, there came a woman. We're meeting a woman. We have previously met a distinguished rabbi, Nicodemus. We had a palate cleanser by going back to John the Baptist, Johnny B, to us. And now we're meeting a woman. And not just any woman, but a woman of Samaria. And she came to draw water. And she came to draw water at noon. Now, that should surprise you, even if you don't know Bible backgrounds, even if you don't know the customs of the Middle East or of ancient Israel. You should just simply be able to see common sense. Why would you travel that mile from Sychar to the well to get water in literally the heat of the day? If you take a walk around Dallas in the summertime, who takes their walk, their constitutional, at noon? Anybody here? No, of course not. You do it in the morning, in the cool of the morning, or in the cool of the late afternoon before you. So you're not going to be gathering water during noon unless there's a reason why you would not perhaps be comfortable going with the other gals of the, and I'm sorry, this was women's work. Carrying water was women's work. And in ancient Israel, it was. And in ancient Samaria, the same. And so why didn't she join her girlfriends in the morning? Well, that's maybe she didn't have any girlfriends to go with, any chums. But I revealed too much. Let's just note this information that she's coming at noon. See, Jesus arriving at noon, that's clear. They started walking in the morning, and they got there at noon, and he's tired, and he's thirsty. And this woman came to draw water. And Jesus said to her, "Give me a drink." For his disciples had gone away into the city to buy food. Now that's an extraordinary statement. Give me a drink. First of all, for Jesus to address a woman at all, because Jewish rabbis, religious men, didn't make chit-chat conversation with women. Even the wives of their friends, especially the wives of their friends. But he says to a perfect stranger, female, and a Samaritan, "Give me a drink." Now, John tells us the disciples have left him alone. He sent them into the city to go and buy food. So Jesus is alone. The Samaritan woman is alone. The well is a public location. And Jesus looks at her and says, "Give me a drink." Now, this, by the way, is a Samaritan woman. This is the well going to draw water. This is, again, about 100 years ago, colorized photo. You'll notice that just like in the Jungle Book, they carry their water on their heads and over here. And it's always a bunch of chums, of girlfriends, of the women of the village going together to the well to draw the water. But this woman is on her own. Now, this is Jacob's well. Again, this Jacob's well, about 110 years ago, something like that. It's inside a church. The church has created an archway over it, and there's a big giant church around it. But this is the same Jacob's well that was there 2,000 years ago. That was there in the time of Jacob, 4,000 years ago. Same well, not the same jug, though, but and not the same pail. But it's interesting because this is today it's 100 feet down to the water source. In ancient days, it was even deeper down to the water source. So this is in full color what it looks like. Now the church has services here, and you've got the ornamentation of the Orthodox Church, and this is where she was. This is the well. This is the pail where the water can be drawn. And on special occasions, people go down and they draw the water from the well. And they actually are drinking the same crisp well water that Jacob would have drunk, that Jesus would have drunk. So 4,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago, same well, same water. This is a reconstruction because it's kind of hard to imagine what it was like because the church is built around it. But this is a reconstruction in Nazareth Village. Those of us who went to Israel this past year, we went to Nazareth Village. This is a reconstruction of a well would have looked like. So you can see there's a place to sit down. It's a hole where you can insert your bucket and bring it up and fill your vessel. So that gives you an idea of what it looked like. So therefore, the Samaritan woman who just had a Jewish rabbi ask her for a drink, she says to him, "How is it that you, being a Jew, you're a Jewish man, ask me for a drink, since I am a Samaritan woman? So we've got two things again. We've got the fact that she's a woman, and then we've got that she's a Samaritan woman. And as John spells out here in a parenthetical statement, Jews have no dealings with the Samaritans. It doesn't mean they have no encounters with them. Translated, it actually should read, Jews don't use the dishes of the Samaritans. In other words, they don't have fellowship together whatsoever. Not that they don't have any business transactions, things like that. They don't have any fellowship whatsoever. How can you ask me for a drink? You don't have a vessel, you don't have a cup, so you're going to use my cup? I'm a Samaritan woman. Now, according to the rabbis, Samaritan women were doubly unclean. They were always unclean. We've talked about cleanliness, or cleanness, uncleanness has nothing to do with cleanliness, but the laws of menstruation, the rules of Torah, 2 weeks roughly out of each month, the woman is considered unclean, and her husband, no one should come in contact with her because she is a menstruant. Well, according to the rabbis, Samaritan women are deemed menstruants from their cradle. In other words, Samaritan women are always unclean. So if a Samaritan woman gives you a cup of water, she's going to pass on the cooties to you. She's going to make you unclean as well. So it's one thing not to speak to a woman because it's unseemly. It's a whole other thing not to speak to a Samaritan woman because they will make you ritually, ceremonially unclean. Of course, this doesn't take into account that when it comes to cleanness, uncleanness, Jesus is always the cleaner, not the uncleanee. Like when the leper, you'll remember this from Mark, when the leper comes to him and says, if you are willing, you can make me clean. And Jesus says, I am willing. And he reached out and touched the leper. And instead of the leper passing on his disease to Jesus, Jesus passed on health to him. So there was never an opportunity for Jesus, the healer, to have become unclean. It was his very contact that creates cleanness. But regardless, that's over and above where Mark is right now and beyond our story. That was a little extra thrown in for nothing. But bottom line is, it was very, shall we say, unkosher for Jesus to ask a woman, let alone a Samaritan woman, let alone not with his own cup even, but to use her cup of water or her vessel to draw the water. So anyway, let's talk about the Samaritans for a moment, shall we? Who are they? They are the remnant of the decimated northern kingdom of Israel. You remember 722, the northern kingdom of Israel, which had separated from Judah, which had set up a rival religious system to the Levitical system in Judah. But they were decimated, they were destroyed by Assyria. And Assyria took the cream of the crop from the northern kingdom of Israel and exiled them to various different places in the kingdom, leaving what the rabbis, and actually what the scripture calls the Am Haaretz, the people of the land. In other words, people who were without title, without honor. They're just common people. And he brought in Gentile populations from Babylon and various other different places in the Assyrian kingdom, brought them in to intermingle and intermarry with the native Israelite inhabitants. They become the Samaritans. So that's their identity. The story is found in 2 Kings 17. So Israel is carried away into exile from their own land to Assyria until this day, the day that the Kings was written. The king of Assyria brought men and settled them in the cities of Samaria in place of the sons of Israel. So they possessed Samaria and lived in its cities. At the beginning of their living there, they did not fear the Lord, the God of Israel. Therefore, the Lord, Jehovah, sent lions among them, not lions and tigers and bears. Lions, period, were enough. And among them, and they killed some of them, to which they said, they spoke to the king of Assyria, therefore. The nations which you've carried away into exile in the cities of Samaria do not know the custom of the God of the land. So he sent lions among them, and behold, they killed them, because they do not know the custom of the God of this land. So the king of Assyria commanded, saying, there, take one of the priests whom you carried away into exile, Levitical priests, and let him go back and live among these people, later become the Samaritans. And let him teach them the custom of the God of the land. Let him give them instruction via the way of Jehovah. But every nation still made gods of its own and put them in the houses of the high places which the people of Samaria had made, every nation in their cities in which they lived. So they feared the Lord, so they added Jehovah to their pantheon. In other words, they feared the Lord and served their own gods, according to the custom of the nations from among whom they had been carried away into exile. So the Samaritans developed what's called a syncretism, and a syncretistic religion of biblical Judaism, following the one true God, with a lot of paganism in it as well. Eventually, by the time Jesus gets around to having this conversation with the Samaritan woman, by that point, the Samaritans were indeed monotheistic. They were very close to basic kernel of Jewish practice in the day. They developed their own. They put their own flair on it. They only read the Pentateuch, the Torah, the 5 books of Moses. And they went through and they made a little modification here and there regarding what was important in the Torah. So it's a little bit different from the Torah, slightly different. But they rejected, just like the Sadducees. Remember, the Sadducees rejected the prophets and the writings and didn't view them as being authoritative. So too the Samaritans. So the Sadducees and Samaritans have a little bit in common, except the Sadducees at least are following the biblical precepts of the Levitical worship, but the Samaritans are not. They are separate and apart from the Jewish people. So according to the religion, again, a Levitical priest was sent to instruct them in the Jewish religion. So they incorporated the worship of the Lord with idol worship, and so you have this hybrid religion, the syncretized hybrid religion called Samaritanism. There are still Samaritans today. And they worship the one God. They revered Moses, and they observed Sabbath, circumcision, and the Torah. This is how it developed from the time of the 7th century all the way through to the time of Jesus. They were viewed as heretics by the Jews, accorded no better than semi-Gentile status. They worshiped the one true God, and they were half Jewish. They were neither fish nor fowl in a sense, according to Jewish people. They were not Gentiles, but they weren't full Jews. They were somewhere in a no man's land. And they were treated by the Jewish people as virtual pariahs. And the Jews allowed no contact with the Samaritans. And in many cases, as I spelled out before, they went out of their way to avoid the territory. And the Samaritans, for their part, they returned the sentiment. They didn't like the Jewish people either. Strong animosity existed between the two communities almost from the beginning. The Hasmoneans, remember the free and independent Jewish kingdom that existed between the revolution against Greece, story of Hanukkah, and 100 years later the coming of the Romans and the Roman occupation. During that period of time, the Hasmonean kings had destroyed the Samaritan temple up on Mount Gerizim. And so the Samaritans, they were upset, and so they made trouble as well. I'll get into that in a moment. But there's a reason the Samaritans made trouble for the Jewish people from the beginning. We see it in Ezra. Then the people of the land, that's the Samaritans, discouraged the people of Judah who had returned from exile, from the Babylonian exile, and frightened them from building, right? They're going to rebuild the temple, they're going to rebuild the walls, and try to frighten and stymie them. And they hired counselors against them to frustrate their counsel all the days of Cyrus, king of Persia, until the reign of Darius, king of Persia, until the next administration came in. Now, in the reign of Ahasuerus, you may remember him from being Esther's husband. In the reign of Ahasuerus, Xerxes, in the beginning of his reign, they wrote an accusation against the inhabitants of Judah and Jerusalem. And in the days of Artaxerxes, next king, they wrote to him, the king of Persia. So the Samaritan people, according to Ezra, were making trouble for the Jewish people, political trouble, and waging psychological warfare against them from the moment that they returned. There's a pattern that we see: the Jewish people exiled from the land, the people who were there in their absence get comfortable, and when the Jewish people return, they make trouble for them trying to rebuild and reclaim their ancestral homeland. Nehemiah gives us the same story, right? It was reported to Sanballat, Tobiah, and Geshem the Arab, these are Samaritans, and to the rest of our enemies that I had rebuilt the wall, and that no breach remained. In other words, Nehemiah, between chapter 1 and chapter 6, he has built the wall. The Israelites have restored it, record time, although at that time I had not set up the doors in the gates, so the walls are up, but the gates are open. Sanballat, Geshem, the Arab, sent a message to me saying, "Come, let us meet together in the plain of Ono." And so Nehemiah said to Sanballat, "Oh no, they were planning to harm me, so I was not going to go." I sent messengers to them, said, "I'm doing great work, I can't come down, I'm busy. Why should the work stop? Well, I leave it and come down to you." They sent messages to me 4 times in this manner. I answered them all in the same way. 4 times, "Come to the plain of Ono." 4 times Nehemiah says, "Oh no," for all of them were trying to frighten us, thinking they will become discouraged with the work and it will not be done. We will stymie their rebuilding the walls of Jerusalem and the city. So there's Jewish animosity, and therefore Jews allowed no contact with the Samaritans. They went out of the way to avoid the territory. They strictly prohibited the Samaritans from worshiping at Jerusalem. That's why the Samaritans created an alternative on Gerizim. Samaritans were forbidden to intermarry with Jews, and Jews forbidden any social contact with the Samaritans. So the Hasmoneans came, they destroyed the temple at Gerizim, and so the Samaritans returned the favor. This is according to Josephus, as the Jews were celebrating the Feast of Unleavened Bread, which we call the Passover. It was customary for the priest to open the temple gates just after midnight, so that it would facilitate the free flow of worshipers, and so they opened the doors of the temple during Passover. When, therefore, those gates were first opened, some of the Samaritans came privately into Jerusalem and threw about dead men's bodies in the cloister, on the grounds of the temple, on which account the Jews afterward excluded them out of the temple, which they had not used to do at such festivals, and on other accounts they watched the temple more carefully than they had formerly done. So the Samaritans create some monkey business, and they defile the temple at one of the pilgrimage festivals when the temple needs to be at its pristine, most holy. They throw some dead bodies, they sneak around, and then they sneak out again, making mischief. But again, this kind of animosity goes back and forth. So let's get back now. We've got some background information on the Samaritans. We have background information on why Jesus and the woman shouldn't have had any contact. Let's see what Jesus says. Jesus answered, what was the question she had? "Why are you a Jew, asking me, a Samaritan woman, for a drink?" So Jesus answered and said to her, if you knew the gift of God and who it is that says to you, 'Give me a drink,' You would have asked him, and he would have given you living water. Now, let's talk about the gift of God. What is the gift of God? If you knew the gift of God, most preachers, when they see this, they just say, well, the gift of God, that's eternal life, that's light and heaven. And I think in the context of Jesus talking to the Samaritan woman, the gift of God, as the rabbis discuss, it is the Word of God. And Samaritans only have a truncated version of the Torah. But if you knew the prophets, if you knew the writing, if you knew what Ezekiel said, if you knew what Isaiah said, if you knew what was through and through the Scripture, not just the Torah, if you knew the gift of God, in other words, and if you knew who's talking to you, you would have asked him for water. And that guy, me, he would have given you living water. And she said to him, sir, my dear mister, you have, which is better than Mac, right? Mac, buddy, sir, let me paint the picture for you. I'm a Samaritan woman. You're a Jewish man. You're asking me for a drink. You have nothing to draw with. The well is deep, over 100 feet down. Where are you going to get living water? She's thinking of Chaim Mayim, the moving, running water. Running water like, for example, we saw last year in Israel. Flowing, free water. Sound, please. So that was 104 degrees that day. That running water, that living water, that flowing water, that was refreshing. And you know, if you went to something like that, you didn't need to send a rope down with a bucket. It just came to you. You could just stand under it like this fella and just soak it all up. Where's the living water? When Jesus spoke of the living water, and he didn't even have a bucket. This, by the way, is a 2,000-year-old bucket, okay? And it looks it. She says, you're not greater than our father Jacob, are you? Who gave us the well. He's the one who dug that well and drank of it himself and his sons and his cattle. Are you greater than Jacob? Well, I'm afraid we're going to have to leave the narrative here. Well, it's 12:06, I know. It's a good story, and I'm not going to run through it just so we can make time in the Gospel of John. What I want you to see here is Jesus crossing social boundaries. Why would Jesus cross social boundaries that way? Social taboos, let's call it. Why would he do such a thing? Because he could. Right? Because he could. And because he wants to draw this woman into a very deep, 100 feet, more than 100 feet, a very deep conversation about life and the Spirit of God and true worship and who the Messiah truly is. We didn't get to very far in the passage, but and you can cheat, by the way, and you have permission if you want to read the rest of the passage on your own. But I want you to think about this. When we think about Jesus' parable, the Good Samaritan, right? The punchline of that parable is, here's a Jewish guy, he gets mugged, he's dying on the street in the gutter, and a priest comes by, and a judge comes, a civil servant comes by. Oh, these people come by and they, I got to make time. I can't help him. It's too bad. I hope somebody else comes along the road. Priest comes and says, if I touch this guy, he looks dead to me. I could become defiled, and I got priestly duties to attend to. Finally, the only guy who helps him is who? A Samaritan, his neighbor. Who is my neighbor? The Samaritan. So, Jesus, in this very brief encounter with this woman, already in just a few verses, has taught us that there are times when it is appropriate to break social taboos in order to accomplish a greater purpose that will honor and give glory to the Lord. What those social taboos are, we don't know until we come to them. Who do we need to speak to that the Lord would have us speak to? Who would we never deign to have contact with? Who would we never deign to help? And it's interesting because Jesus, yeah, he was thirsty, but Jesus, we've already seen him make wine out of water. Jesus could have made bread out of the stuff. Jesus could have assuaged his hunger, his thirst. Another way, or he could have simply waited longer for his disciples to return with food and drink. Right? This is the same Jesus who went 40 days and nights in the desert, neither eating nor drinking. Jesus could have waited just a little longer, no matter how his belly might have been making sounds, and no matter how dry his throat might have been. He could have observed the social taboos and not engage the woman. But his concern was to communicate the gift of God, the worship of God, the Son of God, and the plan of God for this woman. Jesus cared more for this woman than for the social taboos of his day. According to the rabbis, according to Jesus' colleagues, this woman is always unclean, and she's been unclean from birth. Don't touch her, don't engage her in conversation, and certainly not alone in a well. Don't ask her for anything. Don't take a drink from her. Don't touch the cup that she drinks from. But I dare say that Jesus loved that woman, who was very different from him and in a very different culture. But love and truth and life outweighed the social taboos of the day. We have social taboos in our lives. Our society is filled with social taboos. There are some people who wouldn't cross the street to say hello to me or to you. Maybe there's some people that you wouldn't cross the street. Or maybe there's some people you see coming and you cross the street to get away from them. But no matter what the issue, culture, race, ethnicity, political stance, religious conviction, Jesus shows us that some things are more important than social and cultural taboos. Life, light, and love are three. As we see next week, we'll see some more, and we'll see what's important, and we'll see where Jesus is going with this fabulous conversation that he's just engaged. But for now, I'm afraid I have to leave you in suspense.